So welcome to the first after lunch panel. Congratulations to all of you for having made it out of the lunch sessions. Hopefully you had a good time. My name is Betsy Corcoran. I run EdSurge. We're a newsletter on education, technology, entrepreneurship. If you do not subscribe, this is your momentary free advertisement. Do subscribe. You can find it at edsurge.com. We have a terrific panel here this afternoon. And what I've told the panel members we're going to talk about is everything that's not being talked about in the rest of the conference. This is a conference about education innovation. We're going to talk about the education side. In particular, if we hear words like ecosystem and revolution, we're going to throw something at one of the panelists. Hopefully my aim is not so bad. I'm not going to read the biographies of this wonderful and illustrious crowd. I will try to give you little hints from time to time, but we have an interesting mixture of people who are at the startup age to the more mature businesses. And so we'll get some perspective on that. What I'd like to do is I'd like to start with the fundamental question, which is when you look at the things in education that really matter to teachers, give me one trend, one thing that matters to teachers that's really changed the way you think about your business in the last year. Marjorie. We're going to start with Marjorie from the Scholastic.
I'll start. So not directed to you personally, but it's the Common Core, stupid. I mean, that is what is top of mind to teachers. Now, having said that, it's pretty much staying top of mind right now, because trying to get it deeper into their minds and get them to a place where they can actually teach and make the Common Core come alive, we're not there yet. And so Scholastic, in partnership with the Gates Foundation, we just did focus groups in 3 cities across the United States with teachers. We had 135 teachers in these focus groups, and we talked to them about a lot of topics. One of them was Common Core. So this is what we heard. We heard, great, Common Core, really excited about it, really support it, great idea, wonderful. Common Core, yeah, I definitely know what it is. I went to a one-day training and somebody gave me a binder. Ready to teach it, not ready to teach it.
And in fact, let me interrupt for a second and ask this audience. I'm sure that everyone knows the term Common Core. Let me ask you this. How many people have ever read any one of the standards in the Common Core? All right. Very good. How many of you feel that you understand the difference between the Common Core and what your state assessments were, whatever your state assessments were? Not so many. Okay. All right. So Common Core.
Common Core.
Ivan.
Save me time.
Ivan, talk to the mic there.
Yeah.
Ivan is representing In Bloom, which, as you know, is all about data, but we're not talking about data right now.
So is it working? Yeah. Okay, good. Save time.
Save time.
Teachers, same thing. We did 900 interviews with teachers 18 months ago, and what they told us again and again is our life is difficult. Technology makes our life even more difficult. Save us time, save us pain, and we need to do that. And the more we give them technology, sometimes the more we make their life difficult and the more time we consume as well.
But to save time, just to press on that for a minute, that means save time to do?
To spend more time with the kids, to be more effective the way I prepare my lesson, more effective the way I mark my copies, the way I prepare my courses, the way I find the content I need. So I don't want to spend time doing all these things. I want to spend time with my students in the classroom, not doing other stuff.
But what you're also saying is, I want to teach the way I have always taught, but teach a little more efficiently. Is that what you're saying?
To some extent, I think teachers are open to change as long as we make it easy for them. We can't ask them to change completely overnight. I mean, it's a big change management piece. We can't say, okay, guys, forget everything you've done for 20 years. We'll do it differently now. I think teachers are very much open to change, if it makes sense. They just don't want to fill in more paperwork and access more systems, more computers, and and more stuff. That's what it is. So it's not against change. It's about wasting more time doing unproductive stuff.
And again, I have to go back to the audience. If you could think for one moment of a piece of new technology that you started using, how many people felt that that piece of new technology saved them time in the first 12 months that they used it? How many people feel that it took them more time to learn that new piece of technology during the first 12 months that they used it? A little bit more. Other people are not sure. You're staying away from technology altogether. Okay. Okay, good. Good to know. Tom
would,
or Tyler. Tyler is from
Oh,
Clever, is the youngest company on our panel here, right?
I guess so.
Okay.
Actually, I don't know, Yvonne. You might win that.
Oh, that's true. You might vie there a little bit.
Anyways, so I would piggyback on that and say, not does it just save me time, but this has to make my life easier. And so much of the change that we see happening in the classroom, with technology, the whole reason we founded Clever was we realized technology is often creating more work for teachers. And what we found is, there's this perception that teachers are really resistant to change. And when we went out to the classrooms and actually talked to them, and from our own experiences in the classroom, we realized they're not resistant to change at all. In fact, there are many teachers who are cheerleading it. But any of these solutions that aren't grounded in the teacher's real day-to-day experiences in the classroom quickly create more work for them and kind of fizzle off. And so what we see succeeding right now in education are things that make teachers' lives easier. And specifically, a lot of those solutions come from, teachers or people starting companies based on their own experiences and what they saw in the classroom and the needs they had, as opposed to kind of abstract, here's what education needs type solutions.
Okay. Larry, you want to jump in there? Larry is representing Amplify, which is a bigger fish.
I guess so. So I think, Betsy, I would nominate the ecosystem revolution as the main thing. I just wanted to see how well she could throw.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do a wise thing, which is to agree with Marjorie that it's the Common Core.
Very wise.
And she has a big red dog that I don't want to fall on the wrong side of. I guess I would say a specific thing about that. I think a lot of people are focused on what is the nature of the instructional change. I actually think that the big driver is just the phenomenon that everybody is now working on the same problem, so that there's real competition in which small players, medium players, big players can all be trying to solve for how do we get results on the same set of standards, instead of a system that really favored big players who could address the diversity of 50 different standards and 50 different ways of distributing things. So it's the Common Core and its particular role in consolidating and aggregating demand.
Larry, I'm going to argue with you for a minute. I mean, to the extent that consolidation is good for the industry, that's a good thing. But if I'm a teacher, is it really that important to me?
So I think common standards on their own, perhaps not. But given that almost every every teacher lives in a system of kind of morbidly obese standards right now, the idea of a set that are fewer and clearer and higher that also have this effect of aggregating demand feels like a big advance for the field. So it matters that they're really good standards that I think are worth teaching to.
Tom Vander Ark, as you may know, I hope you know, is a very, very long-time person in this industry, prolific writer and blogger. Recommend you read his blog as well, and also an investor.
Which is gettingsmart.com.
Thank you.
The other.
Notice I tactfully didn't mention the name.
So I'll make two comments. If this is not the ed tech panel, this is the sort of anthropology panel. If I think of the two impacts in this decade, the one most important thing that's already occurred is just the introduction of mobile technology, the tablet inflection that started in 2010, not just from the ed tech standpoint, but from the standpoint of how it's changed the organizational dynamics of schools and districts. We've always had teachers that have done their own thing. I think we have more teachers that are off the ranch now than ever, and many in a good way and some not. But the fact that parents, teachers, and kids are finding and adopting digital learning resources on their own. Michael talked about this morning of how sort of the industry has flipped, and it's now the bottoms-up force that's coming at ed leaders is really quite remarkable and very different. It's not anything that, it's much stronger than when I was a public school superintendent. So you have this bottoms-up thing that's happening. In terms of the Common Core, we think about it and talk about it all the time. I don't think the rubber hits the road until the spring of 2015 when the online assessments are given in most states. That's when the Common Core hits the road, and the fall of 2015, the conversations that happened in 2016, that's when parents and teachers really find out what the Common Core is about.
I didn't hear anyone on the panel so far say that teachers want some control over what they're teaching, how they're teaching, that
Well,
they want to have some
I said
you know,
I think
autonomy.
I think more teachers have taken control, and the tablet inflection and the fact there's so many free and great resources out there has allowed teacher leaders to be more assertive.
And I think what we see and we hear more and more is teachers want to choose their own applications. And I think districts are more and more prepared now to move that to them. There's a big procurement question. There are some technical questions. But you know, you have your smartphone, you have 50, 60, 80 apps, and they're very small. They do something very specific. Teachers don't understand why they can't have that in the classroom. They want the same flexibility. They don't want to pick this big monster system that does everything that's been designed for the middle. They want to pick the application for them as a music teacher, as a grade 8 math teacher, and others. So they want more control on the content, on the applications as well.
Now, I want to hear Larry's point of view on this, because Larry, as I understand the Amplify approach, you actually have kind of locked in what are the applications that a teacher's going to have on the Amplify platform. Is that correct?
I don't think so. So I should say that I am here as president of Amplify Learning, which is a group that's doing curriculum. And there is a distinct organization that is doing the Amplify Access tablet. And part of the reason for the distinction is in some ways the issue that you described, that if the tablet was perceived as a platform for delivering a particular set of content, then it wouldn't actually be a platform that was open and gave the kinds of choices that that the Amplify ideal is all about. So my understanding is the idea is that the Amplify tablet will be open to any number of, in the case of the technology that it runs on right now, Android applications for K-12 or just things that run in the browser. There will be, as there is in other ecosystems, there may be approval processes. Are these apps that are ready for prime time in an enterprise setting? But I think that's just doing a kind of filtering that teachers are actually asking for. They don't want to have to deal with putting in the search for 50 applications and having to sort through which ones work and don't work. I think within the category of those that work, they want to be able to choose which are the best. So the Amplify tablet is intended to be open in exactly that way.
Marjorie, is that open?
Yeah, I want to push back on you, because we're at a moment where we have more children who are coming to school from homes of poverty, more children who are challenged by acquiring deep academic application of English. We have a lot of challenges in school, and I worry about coherence. So I don't have an issue with teachers having 50 apps, but I don't think I think that's, that's fun and on the fringe. Because at the center, if we're gonna really move kids towards a higher rigor and standards required by Common Core, and I think we have to as a country, we need to do that, we need coherence, and we're hearing that in the marketplace. I think people want coherence. So you've got this pressure between, could not agree more with the bottom up, the great apps. We have a little app called Sushi Monster, which everybody should download. It's free. It's so much fun. This little monster's like doing math and eating sushi. Really fun. We've had 500,000 downloads. It's great. It is not going to teach kids math. It's just not. It's fun. It's good. It can be on the fringe. It's something that a lot of teachers and kids are using in schools. So I'm a big believer in coherence.
I want to
Yeah.
talk about this.
Yeah. Sushi Monster?
No,
Good.
about coherence.
Okay.
So, it's my sense that if if I've ever had one important insight in my life, it was observing that good schools had coherence, where everything worked together for teachers and kids. This is, I think, a really core insight or just an observation that I made in the late 90s. And then I spent 10 years trying to help create 1,200 schools around this idea of coherence. And now we need to redefine what that looks like, because now I helped a couple of former governors create this digitallearningnow.com, which in part advocates for unbundling and choice to the course level, which I think is a great idea. But when kids have choice to the course and teachers have choice to the app, and things are completely atomized, it makes me wonder, how does that add up to a coherent education for kids? One very specific example is I'm writing a blended learning paper, and we've been interviewing teachers who are using adaptive instructional systems. Well, two observations. One is none of the teachers actually use the data to inform anything that happens in the rest of their classroom. And two, you think about all these kids have the benefit of adaptive instruction, which is quickly adapting to their instructional need, but they're all sitting in a core math curriculum that's standards-based and cohort-based, right? So they're marching through a regular old Common Core curriculum, and then they're getting this adaptive, personalized stuff. So that might be beneficial, but it's not coherent, right? No longer does the math program hang together as a thoughtful unit of instruction, right? And so I think all the disruptions that we're adding and all the options that we're adding might be interesting whiz-bang, but they're probably going the opposite direction of coherence.
So I also want to hear from Tyler, because you're going to thousands of schools and you're delivering your help. The Clever app is a way to connect all of these myriad of applications with schools' information systems. So you're actually seeing what schools want and what they're trying. Are you seeing this kind of coherence that Tom and Marjorie are talking about?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting trade-off where, from going back to the Industrial Revolution, we learned about the benefits of specialization. And there are some really compelling point solutions out there that, help reading intervention, at a particular grade level better than anyone else, or help with, a very particular math at a very particular grade level and a very particular standard better than anyone else. And I think that's great. I think that's great that there's solutions out there that when you specialize so well, you can do something better than anyone else in the universe. And there's a lot of companies in this room who are doing exactly that. But I would agree that this lack of coherence is the biggest threat to ed tech. And Alex Hernandez had a really incredible blog post the other day, and it was an open letter to the companies of ed tech. And he said, for the love of God, please no more point solutions that don't, talk or integrate with other things. What teachers need is coherence. And that's what they had back when they would buy, all of their curriculum and all their materials from one place. For all the downsides of that approach, at least it had coherence. And I think the biggest challenge for those of us pushing the envelope in ed tech is how do we bring that same coherence to all of this exciting and potentially pretty impressive. God, I just want to say revolution, but I'm not going to say it.
Don't say that.
But all this
It's so
progress we're
crazy
making
too.
in improving specific outcomes, how do we tie that together? But I'm very optimistic.
All right,
So I agree.
let me ask
that-
the audience a question too. First off, how many of you were at this conference last year? Okay, so I'd say less than half. How many of you would have said you were in the education business last year? Okay, how many people are this year in the education business for the first time? Oh, couple, not too many. Okay, good. So the question that I have is, we see this kind of proliferation of lots of companies, lots of apps, lots of sushi apps. 5 years from now, half of them gone? 3/4 of them gone? Are we back to 3 big companies? Marjorie?
Whoa. So,
Get in trouble.
no, I'm going to answer this exactly the way I see it. So, it's interesting to me that big is back. And
Wait, is Big back?
I think it is back.
Already?
Because I'm sitting next to Larry, who's got a big audacious plan that is appealing to people that, maybe the word is coherence. I think when we talk to customers, a lot of them feel that their schools are loaded with stuff that's not being used, that doesn't work together. I was talking to a state superintendent last week who said that schools are archaeological digs where you can go in and you can take the layers out and see all the stuff in there. So I think that there's it's interesting because I think we were in a, it felt so disruptive and disorganized a couple of years ago, and now it feels like, boy, big is back. And big solutions like In Bloom, Amplify, Scholastic, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tom is looking at the ceiling. Tom, is it over for the little guys? Is big going
By the way, I
back?
didn't say it was over for the little guys. I just said big is back.
Okay, Tom, come on.
No, it's like somebody said this morning, it's bottom of the first inning. So we're just at the beginning of the most important revolution in the way human beings learn. We're at a stage now where we're starting to see some companies fail. But I think most of those participants are right into another venture. So, as I look at the Learn Capital portfolio, we've invested in about 30 companies. Half of those are doing really, really well. We've had a couple that have gone by the wayside. We've had actually a couple sort of iterate out of education into things that are easier. But I would say the hit rate is really high. What I'm most optimistic about is, in addition to the success of those companies, is the net import of talent into our sector in the last few years has been extraordinary. I mean, all the smart kids want to work in education now.
But I want to come back to the big question. Larry, would you start a startup now in education?
I think I sort of am. It's just one that has a lot of capital, and it's what they
Let me
call
put it this
a
way:
fat
would you
startup.
start a less funded startup now?
I think so. Meaning, I think part of what we're starting to see is a healthier ecosystem, in which.
He's got 3 strikes against him.
Exactly. In which the thing that you would want to see, which is a proliferation of small companies, some of them getting acquired into larger companies, some of them crossing the chasm to become mid-sized and bigger companies. I think we might start having the flow of capital in at each of those levels, just because.
Let me connect these two. I mean, so one thing that we have seen is, with all the seed funding and the incubators and stuff, we have a lot of smart kids working on small problems, right? Building small apps for current problems. So what we need are more smart people working on big solutions, right? So that's a combination of, could be big companies, but it's big capabilities and a longer a runway of funding to be able to do important work.
Agreed.
Tom, give us an example.
Although,
What's an important problem? I mean, be a little more precise there.
The learning platforms have not made the evolution that they should have in the last 4 years. The choices, we don't have ecosystems around learning platforms. So they just haven't made the big jump that they should. And because these ecosystems are going to cost $200 or $300 million to develop, right? So it's going to take a bunch of partners, probably private-public partnerships around these platforms. So it's the apps that are going to sit on top of In Bloom that will create one. It's the app marketplace that sits on top of Edmodo that will create one, right? It's the marketplace that'll develop around Amplify. These things have
And
been
by the
slower
way,
to
in
develop.
Clever, like, we're huge believers in Clever at Scholastic. So I don't want to be misinterpreted as saying, yeah.
The clever
I don't know.
contingent
People here from
applause.
Clever, yeah. But I don't want to be misinterpreted as saying that I don't think there's opportunities for startups. I think there are. But I think there's a maturation going on here where things are going to become more coalesced, and what we're hearing from customers, they want things to make sense and work together. I just think it's not going to be random. I don't think it's going to be random.
Okay, Marjorie and Larry, how many startups do you think you guys are going to acquire in the next 5 years? And then Tom, how many of your startups, your 30 or 40 companies you're funding, do you think are going to be acquired in the next 5 years?
So this is not a forward-looking statement. It is pure speculation on my part, but
Can't trade on this information.
but I mean, I think that we are in an interesting place where we have a lot of development capacity. And we have a race against time to be ready for the Common Core and a bunch of other transformations that are happening. So almost everything we are working on, there's a kind of build versus buy decision that we are considering. So I'm thinking 5 years?
Yeah.
More than 10, fewer than 25.
Okay, more than 10, fewer than 25. Marjorie?
We're not that great at acquiring at Scholastic.
We can help you with that.
Okay.
Tom's got something to sell.
Yeah, no, it's just we're not very acquisitive because it's that build versus buy thing. But I think I would like to see us acquire at least one company a year for the next 5 years, and I would like to see us buy companies that bring us things that broaden our perspective about what we're doing, bring talent in. Yeah, I'd love to see us do
And
that.
Tom, of your portfolio of 30-odd companies?
Didn't you just announce about 6 products today?
We did. And then we did not acquire those.
Okay. Tom, of your
Yeah.
portfolio, how many of
so
those
out of-
companies are going to get sold?
Yeah,
in
I
the
would
next few years?
say we're probably in 33 companies right now, and at least 10 of those will be acquired in the next 5 years, and another 10 will go through either acquire other companies or merge into other companies. So probably 2/3 will be involved in a combination of some sort.
And just if I can weigh in on the small versus big distinction, I have yet to meet any of, especially this crop of entrepreneurs. I recently did a meeting in which the banker person introduced me as the grandfather of this generation of entrepreneurs, and I'm glad you feel some sympathy for that. That's but when I meet this crowd, like, it doesn't seem any one of them, while they might be working on a really focused problem, like, we're going to automate busing schedules, then you say, as on a path to, and they're like total dominance of the platform that parents and consumers and teachers and principals all use to run schools. So it seems like almost all of them have sort of got the mantra of kind of the innovator's dilemma idea. Find a place where you're competing against non-consumption, get something out there that matters to schools, and then figure out how to build from that. So I think it might be a mistake to try to interpret that clever is merely doing what it's doing. It might be up to something even cleverer. And I would say that for a lot of the players that are out there that have an interesting app that's getting some traction, almost all of them are pretty transparent also about what their big play is, but they need to prove it a little bit with teachers.
I personally wouldn't want to bet against any of the companies that I talk to. I mean, yes, there are some companies who are out there maybe too narrowly focused or things like that, but we're out there we're based in San Francisco, and this is where a lot of this innovation's happening, and a lot of these point solutions are being developed, and they all have plans, and part of that is just their investor pitch and whatever else, but...
Do you think they're focused on big problems?
Is grammar help a big problem? Like, I didn't think so until I saw No Red Ink, and I talked to hundreds of teachers who just raved about this product that they'd never had before to help them with this very specific thing. So I think there's a question of what is a big problem, and I would tell you there's a lot of people who thought that wasn't a big problem until somebody solved it.
Yeah,
and,
but
you know,
let me make a quick addition. So, and I'm in that deal, right? So I love No Red Ink, but that ought to be part of a writing platform, which sits in a learning platform, which is tied to a learner profile, which has a great grade book, which has a bunch of services for teachers.
This
kids
sounds like
and
an
parents
RFP,
associated,
Tom.
right? And right now this stuff doesn't plug and play yet, right? And that's the business that InBloom is in, but we're not there yet. That's
Yeah, but I think the real problem is that these pieces don't talk to each other. I don't know
Right.
whether I agree you need this big system that does everything. I think that was the way it was done before, because there was no other way to do that. I think today, we should celebrate the number of innovators and entrepreneurs we have in the industry now. There is more innovation and more investment in ed tech now in the last 12 to 24 months than there was in the last 20 years. So I think it doesn't matter how many companies will stick around in 10 years from now. The question is whether they have 5 or 10 really cool applications that will solve the one problem the teacher has. And back to your point, I agree, Tyler. The point is that it's not, how do you find what is a big issue for a teacher? It could be the thing that takes 20% of the time every single day. That's what matters. It's not about this big monster system, this ERP, the IS or whatever that and I was one of the publishers before, I've been trying to sell for many, many years. When you look at the business industry as well, the ERPs are becoming lighter and lighter. People buy less and less this big monster. They buy actually small application. They buy an application for your expenses. They buy an application for your reporting.
But the stuff works together.
Exactly. My point is it works together. I think it doesn't have to be one big piece, it has to work together. And I think there are technologies and tools today to make it happen. Coherence, absolutely key. Because if you just drop this application over the place, it doesn't solve any problem. So there is a need probably for the chief academic officer or the CEO or the superintendent and so on to really think the way instruction works. But I'm not sure the way to solve this is by dropping the monster application that would solve everything. Not anymore. So it's big back. Yeah, it's exciting to see what Amplify does. I think it's great to see the investment and the vision with no legacy. But I think it's exciting to see as well happens with all these smaller companies come up with one small solution to fix one big problem.
I'd like to go back to the educators for a moment. One of the comments that a number of people have made to me at this conference is that we're not seeing many educators here. So let me ask you guys again, who's a teacher? Yay, 1, 2. Okay, you guys are outnumbered, all right? 3, sort of, maybe. Is the industry doing a good enough job of listening to teachers right now? Are we further, is the industry further or closer to teachers than it was a year ago?
Tom, maybe you think you invest in companies, so do you check that? I mean, in the case of In Bloom, we talked to 900 teachers, and we got a lot of data on there, and they told us we do not want disconnected systems. Make our life easy. We heard that loud and clear. Back to the bubble, I think the latest company is going to go away. A lot of will because there are some great, elegant, exciting solutions. But do they solve a real problem in the classroom?
But let me make a distinction. So I think, yes, I think the current crop of innovators is better connected to the classroom, and they are creating apps for today's problem. That is in part a problem, because what we really need are designed solutions for competency-based environments, student-centered environments. And the problem is we're not building those. So when I talked about the scaffolding earlier, we need to invite entrepreneurs to work on a new scaffolding which says, by the way, we're building for tomorrow's classroom, not the cohort-based model of the past. We're building a student-centered system for the future. And you need some runway to do that, because people aren't necessarily ready to buy that. We have a couple good examples in the room. Kurt is working in Detroit, right, with a design project around the EAA. And the iZone is another. Stephen Hodis is from the iZone. Those are places where you've got a chance at scale to build something for tomorrow. And I think those are more. We need more projects like that.
Marjorie, are you
I want to
closer
talk
or
about this
not?
teacher thing, yeah, because I think that a lot of the companies that we talk to, I think if they told you what was truly in their heart, they would wish the teacher was out of the equation.
Ooh.
And, I think-
why is that? They would wish, you said they
Because I
would wish
think
the
that
teacher
there's-
were out of the equation.
Yeah, because I think that I'm not saying they're not paying attention to teachers, but in their heart of hearts, I think they wish the teachers out of the equation, because you pick up like a little bit of an edge around the procurement process. Like, I have to sell to educators, and wouldn't it be nicer if I could sell to parents and consumers, and I could have a faster degree of change? I could get to parents and consumers better. The procurement process in schools is terrible. It's a barrier. So that's one thing. And then I think the other thing is I think people are pretty cynical about the fact that teachers are at the heart of what's going on in American education.
Why? We talk about what that means.
Well, I think people look at schools and you look at data, and we've had some improvements in American school, but not as much as we would like. So then you say, oh, but we're spending all this money, so what's the problem? Well, okay, do we have bad kids? Do we have bad teachers? Do we have bad content? What's the problem? And I think you can't really do anything about the kids, because people send the kids that they have to school.
Sure.
There is a real feeling out there that the old content is not good. And so, you got the teachers, and I think people think, wouldn't it be great if we could do an end run around teachers, or we could do whatever? But the teachers are critical to what goes on in school. And to be successful, I think, in education, if you're going to have a business in the business of schooling, you have to consider teachers as critical to your business model.
Larry, I have heard you speak a number of times, and you are very, very thoughtful about educators. Would you agree with what Marjorie just said? Would you agree that there's a certain degree of skepticism, even cynicism, about dealing with teachers from the point of view of companies?
So I think that might apply to a set of what I guess I would call, the generations are getting shorter, but a slightly previous generation of entrepreneurs that were trying to sell a certain kind of system into state and district procurement or direct to consumers, for which the sort of threshold of teacher adoption wasn't actually their buyer, and so it wasn't the problem they were trying to solve. They quickly ran into, though, the fact that that was their user, and if they weren't using it, then quickly the procurement would start to unravel. So it was a big problem. I do think that the generation that I'm running into the most right now, often in the form of like 3 or 4 people in a garage, is working on freemium applications of one sort or another that depend on kind of grassroots teacher adoption. And so they actually are pretty focused on the use case of, so how do teachers actually use gradebooks? How do they actually socially network? How do they share lessons? And in those cases, I think they are also sort of born into the disciplines of a user-centered design where they're actually sitting with users as they do stuff. And the fact that they are almost all web-based is a thing that's always been missing from education software. You deploy it in the school, and then you can't watch the user behavior. But now that all these things are hosted in the cloud, you can't help but see when teachers stop using it, or when there's part of it that they don't click on. And so I think that the design is becoming much more responsive. Are people solving the kind of deep problems of where teachers need to go? Are they skating to where the puck will be around the challenges of Common Core instruction? I'm not seeing a lot of that. I think people are, but I often find, as a starting point, finding a concrete current problem and seeing if you can drive real teacher adoption feels like a great place to start.
Hang on to that thought for 1 second. I'm going to ask one other question, and then I am going to open it up to the audience. And if you have a question, we have a gentleman here, Keith, with a mic. And so, wait, not yet. You're quick to the draw there, and I appreciate that. But just give me one more chance. I actually want to ask each of you really quickly, and actually I would ask this of the audience too, just a little thought experiment. If you had only one sales call to make, you've only got one sales call to make, would you go talk to a parent, a teacher, a principal, a superintendent, or somebody else? And you'd have to tell me who that other person is. So you've got one sales call. Who do you go see? And think this question through yourselves. Go.
I mean, sales are still very much done at the district level, so you want to go to the superintendents.
You're going to go to the superintendent. Tom, where are you or your company's going to go?
So this, the Digital Learning Now policy series that we've been writing, we just released a paper on finance this morning, is aimed at state policymakers because we think state policy matters a lot.
So you're going to
so
state
I would say
policymaker.
the governor and chief.
Okay,
I
Marjorie,
would
where are
go
you
to
going?
the chief academic officer.
Chief Academic Officer. Larry, where are you going?
I think if I can't find a state superintendent, I'll go with a district superintendent. It's all about aggregating demand.
And Tyler, where are you going?
It's superintendent.
So nobody's going to the teacher.
They're not the spender.
They're
in
not
most
in the
Yeah,
spender
they're not
level.
empowered yet.
Okay.
Now, if I want to do a product design meeting, I'll go meet with a teacher. But
Yeah.
if it's a sales call, it's got to be the people who are
Got to
spending.
be the sales. Okay, gentlemen here, quick to the draw. Turn around for the mic.
Sorry. So that leads into perfectly my question. I know at least a few of you have been around the edtech space for a while, as I have. And the sword that edtech companies fall on and have fallen on historically has always been the challenge of the procurement system. The fact that you have this sort of incredibly expensive, disparate group of buyers that you have to send out, an expensive sales force to serve, turnover of superintendents. I mean, there's a myriad of problems. I don't need to go through them all. None of those to me seem to have changed. right? You do have the internet as a way to sort of do an end run around them maybe, but what's different now that's gonna overcome that enormous obstacle that has existed in ed tech for 25 years?
So the question is there any change that you see in the procurement part of this industry?
Yeah.
Why is it different now from that perspective?
No, I think,
Right. Is it at all?
I think it's fundamentally different, and there's two ways to create value. One is the lean startup, bottom up. You get surface area, and then you build on the network effects. So that is now possible. It really wasn't possible 3 years ago. And from the top-down standpoint, the engineered design solution, Common Core really makes that possible in a way that wasn't possible. So I think that the opportunity to create value, to create productive tools is never been anything like what the opportunity that we have right now.
Marjorie?
Well, I don't think it's that different. I think one of the really exciting things is how much great freeware you see and apps you see, and I think that there's so much hunger, like as Larry said, for better lessons. Some of these things that things that teachers are sharing, Edmodo, all that. So I think all that is working really well. But when it comes to actually getting somebody to write a PO for something, we are running into more companies out there, so people are making it work. But when you think about getting a PO from a school district, often they have to go to a school board, there's an RFP, you have to meet certain requirements with an RFP. Those are just some of the realities, and hey, a lot of the time, we don't like those realities either, but school districts do have a responsibility to make good decisions from a public policy point of view. So some of that, there is a reason why that stuff is there.
Okay, all right. Do you see anything different, Tyler?
So I think that's a really interesting question because we've done a good job for a long time of drumming up this idea that it's impossible to sell to schools and sell to districts. And Larry, I think you even wrote a paper about this exact topic. And so what I noticed out in San Francisco is there's a whole generation of startups who are starting companies in education and deathly afraid of selling to schools. Like, I think we've hammered that point home maybe a little too well.
I was trying to discourage competition with that paper. So.
And so when people come, to us and others for advice, a lot of it's how do I avoid, this process of selling to schools, and that's why we see a lot of this freemium and everything else as kind of these new pervasive models in ed tech. And it's interesting because the models that are proven and work, and even the companies today that I think are among the most successful, like Mastery Connect here in the third row. It's still the same procurement process where they're out there with feet on the street, talking to districts, understanding their needs, and responding to, hairy RFPs. And I think there's a lot to be said to that. And there's a lot of people I say, try hiring a salesperson instead of this freemium approach and see what happens.
I also want to, I think something pretty fundamental is changing right now. I don't know if we've seen the effects of it. So it's not that procurement officers are suddenly enlightened and sort of chasing real innovation for their districts. That's in some ways not their job, as Marjorie points out. But I do think that the number of procurements that right now are insisting upon a new thing, which is that this should be a solution that addresses a common set of standards that start to create a competitive marketplace rather than a locked-in marketplace, and the growing number that are saying, and it needs to be, the system needs to be compatible with an interoperability solution such as InBloom, creates a world in which it is going to start to be the case that switching costs of moving from one thing to another when something else is working better are about to drop a lot, and we're going to start to have real competition enabled by the commonality of the platform. And then because so many of these solutions are designed from the ground up about being data rich in one way or another, and districts are becoming real consumers of that, the fact that switching costs will be low, a real competition environment will spring up because everyone's focused on the same set of standards, and then that there might be data that comes out of this that drives to the question of which things are actually effective in producing outcomes, could change the whole. Part of why procurement is so Byzantine is it's trying to protect against bad purchasing instead of enabling buying things that work. But since we haven't really known what worked, That hasn't been a very live way to run a purchasing system. But I think it will be the case that once, and I think we're a few years away from this, but not 10 years away from it, once the system is geared up to be interested in what works and to quickly transition to things that work, that may clear a lot of the cobwebs away from the procurement system.
So Larry, can we have you on the record as saying that maybe in 2 years you might consider revising that famous paper that you wrote?
Yeah, yes, that
Okay, you
paper
heard it here.
still in effect for 2 more years, but I think once Common Core is fully in place and this market seems to emerge, you can stop reading it.
And I would prepare to make a bet that 2 to 5 years from now, there will be more procurement done by the teachers. There will be more and more. There will be tools to allow that. There will be money flowing down to the teachers, and there will be tools as well to allow them to connect these applications. Not the case today. Not much has changed. It's a problem. But 2 to 5 years, there will be a growing portion of this purchase done made by the teachers themselves.
So make sure you come back in 2 to 5 years. Yes, ma'am, in the front. And we have Mike. Oh, I'm sorry. Mike,
Yeah, I
right
just
back
wanted to ask a question about coherence and what drives that. And is that driven by business, or is that driven by a clear instructional vision using all of the great tools that the districts have available to them and great professional development to achieve those instructional goals?
Or is the question also whose idea, who's creating the coherence? In other words, are you sort of asking, who's defining coherent?
So I think there's 2 sources. There's a vendor source and a leader source. Right now, creating a coherent school is an act of heroic leadership. It takes somebody with real vision to create a common intellectual mission, as they'd say at High Tech High, and to sustain that over time, and to create structures and tools and schedules and staffing models around that. So it's quite difficult. And my hypothesis is that as these platforms mature and it becomes easier to operate a really comprehensive tool set, it will become easier to create a coherent school. Right? So I think vendors have an opportunity to create these ecosystems that will make it, it'll make it easier to run a good school. So I think.
And will the schools be the same, or will we have very distinctly different models of
Yeah,
coherent
so coherence will
schools?
look different, right? Coherence was KIPP, where every kid was in the classroom getting the same lesson in the same way on the same day. And coherence will be every student has an individual pathway. So every student will have a coherent pathway within a construct of something called school. So very different kind of coherence, but when I mean coherence, I mean everything works together for teachers and kids, right? So it's a set of tools and a sequence of experiences that make sense, that hang together.
Yes, ma'am.
I just have a quick question, and many of you touched on this a little bit in your talk. But in looking at a city like New York City, where you have over 1 million children in the school system, you've got plenty more, hundreds if not thousands of independent schools with parents who are looking for resources for their children. Going to the App Store is not necessarily the greatest place to find these things when you have a kid who's struggling in math or accelerated in this, that, or the other subject. And Tom, you touched on this at South by Southwest EDU a bit. How can we start to reach parents directly in other ways besides hoping they'll find you on the App Store?
So how do we reach parents?
How are you reaching parents?
Yeah. Would you guys like to weigh in?
Question.
Larry? How is Amplify going to reach parents?
Yeah, so
What's the plan?
I'm going to weigh into this in a slightly wonky way, but it is one of the pieces of the puzzle that is not entirely solved yet, although there are people in this room who work on it. It's just not solved systematically, which is it turns out to be non-trivial to invite parents into the sharing of district data. It means that you actually have to be able to enroll parents into the data systems, create usernames and passwords. When someone loses custody of a kid, withdraw the password that used to get them access to data. It's actually a pretty intensive services business, and so it is likely to fragment into those who do directly go to parents in a kind of consumer way for them to opt in. And then there is a missing piece of the puzzle that, again, I think I'm within 100 yards of 5 or 6 people who will someday be involved in solving this, but solving that kind of data infrastructure and services intensive thing that is really about enabling a community of people, the membership in which is not just about opting in. You actually have to be the parent or be in a guardian position, and working on all that is hard. So I would put that out there as one of those things that might seem like nobody's reaching out to the parents and getting that grassroots involvement, when in fact there's a systems level problem that most school districts are not taking seriously in order to get there.
Ivan,
and-
do you want to weigh in on this? Because a month ago you had totally black hair, right?
Yeah, it's been interesting months for us on the whole data piece and the parents and so on. My view is that in months or years from now, the parents will be the one demanding data. They will be the one asking for information. And right now, I don't think we've done a good job collectively to explain to parents what they can do with data. And there is a big piece of work for us to do collectively, the industry, the players, the policymakers, and so on, to explain why it's so important. The good news is now we have access to great data. And I think the parent market is underserved. There is no great tool that basically packages information in a meaningful way for the parents. You know, I've got 2 young kids. I like to know what my kids have done in school. I like to know what I can discuss with them at dinner. I like to take them to the zoo because we discussed, we studied giraffe today, whatever in there. Couldn't be done until now because there was no way to collect the data and aggregate the data. That's the case now. So I think you asked Larry if you would start a startup today. If I would start a startup today, I would start a startup basically in the parent communication, basically making sense of all this information that's collected and telling the parents what they can do to help the kids. We need to do a better job to explain that.
So
We
I
haven't
was
done a
even
job.
going to back up more and just, how do we even help parents understand what it is their kids are learning?
Absolutely.
How they can help them? So I totally agree with you that parents will demand this. But to understand what all that means, they need to know what it is they're doing. And I think as a country, we're not doing a very good job at this. Like, it was disturbing to me that in the presidential election, the word education hardly came up. So, it's one of those things where parents really care about their kids at their school, but trying to get information to parents, help them figure out what's going on. We have a lot of parents who come to scholastic.com. There's a lot of information on the internet. There's a lot of good stuff out there for parents, but it's not organized. It's often hard to digest.
So if you have a startup and you haven't found your very big problem, we may have identified it for you, which is reaching the parents. I have one last question, and then we will have to wrap up this panel. I would like each of you, we've talked at this conference about return on education. I'd love to have one element that should be a factor. If we have something like the return on education, almost like the CPI or something, what's one element that you would absolutely want to have in that basket of assessing a return on education?
So I'll
Just
sorry,
one.
Go,
This
go.
is a lightning round, guys, so
No,
one.
The tricky thing is how you measure that, but
Right.
student engagement.
Student engagement. Okay, Tom.
Academic growth, comparable measures of growth for kids on different learning trajectories.
Okay, Marjorie.
Academic growth.
Academic growth, 2 votes. Larry?
The amount of quality work that students do.
Okay.
Scale. Are we getting beyond the most innovative charters to the big public districts and helping kids everywhere?
Terrific. Please join me in thanking the panel.